All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steve Orr. I'm the managing partner at Orr Group. If you've attended our webinars before, we appreciate that you're returning now. If you haven't, welcome. Today we have a really special guest, Mayor Anthony Williams. Anthony insists that I call him Tony, so I will do that. And I will introduce you in just one moment, but thank you for attending. We really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start with some of my own background, just being selfish for a minute because it relates to the topic. Tony, we actually moved here, and my wife and I and kids, 3 kids moved here in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
We originally came to volunteer with a charity that was being sponsored by the firm that I was with in New York, Goldman Sachs. Carol, my wife, joined me as my partner, so we formed a company called Orr Associates Inc., OAI, that was our former name. She and I are 50-50 owners, and we've been doing it for about 30 years. My son CJ is now in the business, and under his leadership, we actually changed the name to Orr Group, so we are now Orr Group. And I mention this because we decided day one that we wanted to focus exclusively on the 501c3 nonprofit space. And we came to DC because this is the capital of, the biggest nonprofits in the country, in addition to New York and other places, but this is really, a hub. So, and as a strategy, we decided as a firm to become what we call embedded partners. So unlike most consulting practices that do wonderful work in delivering advice, and we do a lot of that too, we really like to dig in as partners and sit side by side with our nonprofit partners and actually help them execute these plans, which many times involve fundraising, relationship building, and just a whole bunch of other activities. So we're a national firm now. We practice in 6 cities at least, but more than that, but 6 cities are our focus. And then we have a staff of about 50 professionals. So I mentioned that because today's topic is talking just about the nonprofit community in the DMV, with special focus, of course, on the district, and dealing with how have we been dealing with all the special challenges and the opportunities that have arisen in the midst of a major pandemic. And then more recently, the racial injustice issues, which are still central and of concern for all of us. So we're very fortunate to be joined by Tony Williams. And we really want to try to focus as much of the topic on nonprofit community as we can, although we could, with Tony, go into many, many topics. And I've actually gotten to know Tony over the last 5 years or so through the FCC, and I really have a lot of respect for you, Tony. So in introducing you, actually, before I do that, I want to remind everyone that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Feel free, please, to insert your questions at any time. You can also use the chat line if you want. This session will be 30-40 minutes, so don't wait too long if you have a burning question that you want Tony to answer. So with that, Tony, I did a little research and found that you grew up in LA. And your early educational experience was less than stellar, which is sort of prominently displayed at Santa Clara University. But then you joined the Air Force. You worked very hard to earn an appointment at the Air Force Academy, which my family is very familiar with, and eventually did so. But then you left the service as a conscientious objector, and having gone through the same period of the Vietnam period like you did, I understand completely. Then you went on to Yale, and you graduated magna cum laude in political science, and then proceeded on to that little place called Harvard Law School and the Kennedy School of Government, and you earned your JD and your master's in public policy. So then you started your political career, and you ended up for a long term as mayor of the District of Columbia. So I want to go into a little more detail on your mayoral period, but let me just pause there for a sec, Tony, and ask you, why did you get initially into public service? What drew you to that?
Both of my parents were committed to public service in different ways. My dad was one of the first African-American police officers in St. Paul. He went on to be a decorated Army captain in World War II. So I had a strong commitment to public service and going into harm's way from my dad. I'm a big believer in that. And from my mom, she was a big major domo in LA, and everybody knows of Maxine Waters now, who's House Finance Committee chair. Well, my mom worked with Maxine Waters way back when she was an assemblywoman in LA. So I got a commitment to public service in that respect from my mom. So
So it's a
You know, I
family.
always say I wouldn't be where I am without people like John Lewis and the civil rights movement, loving parents, and government doing the right thing at the right time. Like for me at Yale, the GI Bill. So,
Good stuff in the blood.
yep,
So you started DC politics as a CFO under that famous Mayor Marion Barry. And Tony, what I found in sort of soft surveys among my younger colleagues is they don't remember all this history. So I'm going to recount just a couple of seconds. You initially were appointed by Marion Barry, but actually reported to what's called the Financial Control Board at that time because the city
right.
was such a mess financially. And that's kind of when I arrived during that period. You have been widely credited, no doubt, with steering the country, the city to financial recovery.
Yeah,
From a big deficit in 1995 to a surplus in 97, and then through your mayoral years, you were in the black, as I understand it, every year. Your term went, as I understand it, also from 1999 to 2007.
hmm,
You ran surpluses. You brought in $40 billion of business investment to DC at a time when it was really looking rough at that, then. You took the city from a bond rating of junk status to an A category, which is top category by all the rating agencies. And an interesting notation, Black Enterprise magazine rated DC at that time as the #2 best city in the United States for African Americans to live and work
yep.
because of the things you were doing around housing and healthcare and jobs and economic development. So, I mean, wow, what a history. And I know from my experience with you post those years that your influence has continued to be really great with all the subsequent mayors. So then in 2012, you became the CEO of the Federal City Council, fondly referred to as FCC, and that is a 501c3. And so you
Right.
now, welcome to our space. The community of folks that you're talking to are all mostly nonprofit members or boards of members, volunteers. And being a member of FCC myself, I see you at work and I see the power that the influential power that you have and your organization has with the great people on the boards. And I also see you as a fundraiser. So I know you're in the trenches with the rest of us, asking for money and encouraging folks to be, part of the charge. And you do a very good job of it because the organization is very successful. So with that, that's my introduction of you. You can tell me I was wrong on anything or embellish on anything you wish, but let's get into the issue of the day. So obviously we've been in this major period of the COVID pandemic, and it has turned our lives around. And so I wanted to ask you a sort of general thing. How have you dealt with COVID, both from a nonprofit executive perspective and because of your perspective on the city? How are we dealing with it? What are the impacts, et cetera?
Well, on the immediate level, as executive of a nonprofit, we've moved like the rest of the universe to a virtual platform. So all of our meetings, all of our conversations, work, activities are all done on a virtual platform. I don't think it's still commensurate with the immediacy and the impact you get when you're personally with someone. But I think it's a fair approximation. So one of the things that we've done that we could talk about is we've created something called District Strong that's been very successful, where we try to bring together leaders in the non-governmental, governmental sector to talk about real problems, urgent problems that are facing DC and the DMV, the District, Maryland, and Virginia. And that's been very successful. We've also looked at, the changes facing cities. I think the draw of people to cities is eternal, all the way back to Athens and Cairo, all the way to London and Paris and Washington, DC. People want to be in cities as long as they're safe and they're livable and they're competitively economic. But I think in the short to medium term, I think COVID is posing a real threat to cities because commuting patterns are changing. People's need for social distancing is causing them to think twice about being in a city. The economics of cities are under threat. Everything from retail to hotels, hospitality, to office space, the demand for office space because of telecommuting is going to be changing the economics of cities in the short to medium term. So, there's a lot of lot of
So
questions
in
out there.
DC specifically, it's probably too early to tell, but do you anticipate, as we go through the fall and then into 2021, that there's going to be a real economic hardships in the city specifically?
Yeah, I think it's we've talked about privately. I think the Fed and the Congress and the president have been right to provide unprecedented stimulus to try to prop up aggregate demand. But you're still going to see, and everybody admits this, you're going to see real damage in sectors of the city's economy. And I think that's going to begin to show up. So the question for, our city leaders, not just in DC, but throughout the DMV and beyond, is really thinking about a strategy for recovering the economy. How do we get people, like your friend Gary Cohn mentioned on one of our discussions, how do we get people and businesses across this chasm as whole as possible is the question before us.
And one of the questions about the FCC is, how have you shifted gears? I see, because I'm a member, all the information you put out, all the webinars you're offering literally on a daily basis. Is that effective in your mind? Are you able to do the same kind of influence convening that you always have done so well?
I think in some ways we've been able to do more convening in that we've broadened our reach. We're including in many of our discussions and conversations people who aren't trustees but are associates of trustees. They may work, for example, for Or Associates, and they're invited on the call. So we have a broader audience than we had before, which I think is good. But again, the lack of personal contact and that personal touch, I think, is still missing. I think that one of the exciting things, though, is I think there's a real need for a presence like ours in other cities around the country. And that's something we're exploring using this virtual platform. In other words, there are businesses around the country that want to have a presence in their communities where they're not just lobbying for whatever, but they're trying to create public value through public-private partnerships, through the nonprofit sphere.
It is really shocking to think, the Board of Trade, the FCC, all of the think tanks in town like Brookings and Aspen and TSIS. I mean, everyone's having to reevaluate models, and Zoom is great. We're all using it aggressively, but without human contact, it does get challenging at some point. So I agree with you, and I think
the thing that makes me sanguine though about DC is that for me, through Mayor Fenty, who I was a strong supporter of, through Mayor Gray, through now Mayor Bowser, we began rebuilding the government with top flight talent. Adrian continued that, Vince continued that, the mayor now is continuing that. So example, the CFO of the district, Jeff DeWitt, is top of the line. He was a finance director in Phoenix with a great recession where, from investment world, Phoenix suffered a catastrophic loss of property value in real estate in the Great Recession. He saw something like a 50% drop in his property tax, and he steered Phoenix through that. So, I love airplanes. We got a great captain right now to take us through this storm. That makes me sanguine and optimistic.
Well, I'm going to challenge the folks who are listening today to go back and Google our former mayor, Tony Williams, and just assess for yourself the influence that you've had on all subsequent administrations and where you started from and where the city was when you took over. And it's pretty major. And that leads me into segue into the issue of, let's talk about racial tension and inequality and such. I mean, I can't think of a more educated, knowledgeable source in DC than you on issues of racial inequality. Where do you think we are right now as a city?
I think it's trite to say, Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It's two cities. I mean, on one hand, we're a very livable city. I think Black Enterprise was right. We're still a great place, a diverse place for people of all different walks of life to do business and to live. And the problems of access in DC really are more in many respects about class and not about race. But there's still need, I think, at the highest levels of economic empowerment, there still needs to be more diversity in a place like DC. That's definitely true in terms of participation and ownership and access to wealth and all the benefits that come from that, both individually and for society. I think there definitely can be improvement. And very, very importantly, we have one of the highest concentrations of wealth and poverty in the same place in the United States. Now, so
here's a good question that gets right to that. Please talk a bit more about what some of the new criteria that we need to consider as we help companies rethink their strategies, cross the chasm, as you said, that you just mentioned, and how do we ensure that we are more inclusive in rebuilding our region?
I think one way to ensure that we get everybody across this chasm is, I think, to focus on how the economy is changing, what these new challenges are. Don't ignore them, but confront them. It's the Jim Collins thing, confront brutal reality. I think this applies to government as well as the private sector. Don't put your head in the sand, confront the problems we have. You've got a big problem with retail even before COVID because of stuff like Amazon. Retail's hurting, restaurants, hospitality's hurting. There's going to be some permanent damage. You got to confront that now. It would be my urge to people. And on the notion of the demand for inclusion and social justice, my favorite saying is, you need vision and action. Vision, the Japanese proverb, vision without action is a daydream. Action without a vision is a nightmare. You need both. You need to have these candid discussions about social justice. But this is where nonprofits come in. They have to, then outcomes have to be delivered at a real, tangible, concrete level where people can see them. That's where the nonprofits come in, because before even people started talking about double bottom line businesses, there were nonprofits. And nonprofits are great because they have the goal of social good. They have the goal of public value, but they have to meet a payroll, and they have to be concerned about their revenue, and they have to make their customers happy. I mean, nonprofits have been doing this for, hundreds of years. And I think they're going to come into their own now, because even though we're throwing unprecedented levels of money at government right now, we still can't do it all through government. And even if we could spend all we could on government, to get the kind of articulation and finesse, that you really need to really attack these problems, you really need partners in the nonprofit sector, because they have a knowledge and an intelligence that government's never going to have. They have a feel that government's never going to have, right? So
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what you just said is really wise, that you've got to have the vision, but you also have to execute.
Right.
And
right.
So, we talk a lot about it at Or Group, about our own DEI concerns and issues. And of course, having a vision is important. I was on a call internally yesterday, refining our vision. And our vision is great. And we have actually been dedicated to it for a long time. The challenge for us all is to think about, well, what are the actions that are really going to change the world. And I couldn't agree with you more that the nonprofit sector is that answer to that call. I mean, nonprofits can execute. Do you have a couple of examples you would look at in our community of nonprofits that are either have answered the call or done a great job or need to do more, any of that?
There are a lot of nonprofits that are doing a good job in the human justice, social service realm. There's Central Kitchen, Jose Andres. There's Martha's Table, Patty Stone Cipher.
Patty's great.
Right. There's Bread for the City, George Jones. Yep. I mean, these are social service agencies that are best in class, right here in DC. I mean, that's just in one realm. I could go down in others, it's not, there are too many to mention. I don't want to get in trouble and pick one over another. But we have one of the strongest charter school movements in the country here. All these are nonprofits that are running these charter schools, and they're really boosting and promoting better education outcomes for DC students. So it would be another great example, I think, of where nonprofits are really working here. You know, the Federal City Council is a great example of a number of, yeah, where we, you know, we historically, as you know, for over 60 years have done high impact projects, but in order to keep from becoming this big, huge behemoth with a lot of G&A, we spin off separate organizations and nonprofits. We created Union Station Redevelopment Corporation when we did the first revitalization of Union Station that you see now. We created a nonprofit, for example, to do the recent refunding of Metro, called Metro Now, $15 billion. We were able to get an alignment of the district, Maryland and Virginia, for a huge undertaking to refund Metro, as an example. We created a nonprofit. We've just gotten the Park Service to commit to revitalizing the 3 golf courses in the district. You know, all these are nonprofits were created to do this.
And you and I have been working together on innovation districts.
Innovation District is another one where we've gotten commitments from one person whose name we know well. He doesn't want to be named, but a great leader, one of the best people in the world in real estate acumen and experience, and Oliver Carr from Carr Enterprises as well, to really support technology investment in DC, a site for technology investment, with the understanding that for all the reasons I just finished talking about with COVID, and more broadly, we need to diversify our economy. We're over-reliant on hospitality, tourism, and federal government.
So I don't want to leave Black Lives Matter and, you know, just all the issues around social injustice before I give you a chance to comment on anything else that you think is of high importance and relevant to the nonprofit community. How do you advise us?
On the social justice and the Black Lives Matter, I always say, you know, there's a comet that's in the sky now. I think it's in the southwest. It's actually a visible comet. Now, what the hell is he talking about comets? I think comets are very cool because they're basically residue from something that happened zillions of years ago that flashes by periodically. You know, they're seen as an omen, you know, historically in ancient times. And when you look at these episodes of police brutality, it's like looking at a comet. You're looking at snapshot, snapshot, snapshot after snapshot. That's a residue of bad social practices that are driving these outcomes periodically again and again and again. When people talk about defunding the police, I mean, that sounds good and it feels good, but it's really not getting at the root causes of what's driving these problems. I think we need to think about public safety. We need to do public safety more intelligently, and we need to reformulate how we support public safety and the police. I understand that. That's not a tomorrow thing. We need to also get at the root drivers of this. We talked about education, childhood nutrition, early childhood, where nonprofits are playing a leadership role. All those things come into play. One of the things the Federal City Council is doing, we talk about more diversity and inclusion at the upper ranks of industries like tech, like finances, you know, like social service, you know, at the highest levels. Modern youth apprenticeships not just make work for students, but modern youth apprenticeships where we're getting kids into the right kind of education, but then we're giving them multiple maximum optionality on blending their education with real life experiences. You know, because kids from our families, they have good internship opportunities and they have good education. We have to do more for kids coming from low, moderate income families. We have to do more to not only get them an education, but provide them the counseling and the structure and the support so they can get into real world successful outcomes.
You know, similarly, you're so knowledgeable and have had such a rich history with, you know, the DC government. When you think about the government and other public services and what it's doing in conjunction with nonprofits. Do you think it's enough? Do you think there's more that could be done? Yeah, comment on that.
There's more that can be done. I mean, the government does a lot of contracting through nonprofits, which is good, but it could do much more creative. That contracting is like I have an idea, I already figured it out, and I'm contracting with you to implement, which is fine because, again, as I was saying, I think a lot of times nonprofits have much better ability and virtuosity, flexibility, articulation and implementing things. So that's good. But there needs to be more involvement of nonprofits in the formulation of strategy by government, the development of plans by government, how they're funding and resourcing those plans. Needs to be much more involvement of nonprofits. Well, first of all, there needs to be more governments across the country. Everybody says, oh, Tony Williams did this and that, with the finances of DC. Well, one of the things is because I came into office as a finance guy, I had an understanding like a business person of balance sheet. You see, most people in government, they don't really think of balance sheet. All they think of is, it'd be like if you're running your business and all you thought about was your cash flow. You didn't even really think about the P&L, much less your balance sheet and creating net worth. Governments are just, for some reason, they are fiercely resistant to creatively thinking about partnering in the overall creation of wealth, partnering in shared kind of unity of purpose around the ownership and wealth of the community, of which government plays a leading role. But if government has, for example, if government has a lot of land and they're very, very risk averse and they're very, very sluggish in trying to leverage and properly use that land to create public wealth, well, that's very selfish because it's not the government's land, it's the community's land. And yes, they don't want to waste that value, but at the same time, I mean, there are two stupid things Uncle Billy could do. One stupid thing that Uncle Billy could do was take Aunt Matilda's inheritance and go to Vegas and blow all the money. That's true. That would be stupid.
Or double the money. Remember, there's always the possibility of doubling.
Yeah, but if he went and just lost all the money, right? Shame on Uncle Billy. But we would also hate Uncle Billy if he took Aunt Matilda's inheritance and he just buried it in the backyard. That's because then 30 years later, basically Uncle Billy has denied the family millions of dollars, let's say. What government really does is they're so afraid of going to Vegas and blowing all the money, so to speak, in this value that they have on their balance sheet. They do nothing and they just bury it in the backyard. And that's a shame.
Yeah, I can give you a lot of examples of things I see that are similar to that, where the earnings continue, but get it out there, put it to work. Yeah,
put it to work in a responsible way.
Yeah.
And this is where nonprofits come. This is where nonprofits also have a value in that with a nonprofit, you can create the right governance platform, the right management controls, the right protections in terms of stewardship and ownership that allow government to make these investments that you wouldn't necessarily have investing with business.
All right, here's a question. Is a higher degree of regionalism required for the DMV to grow responsibly? And are nonprofits the key to bringing the industry, government, and academia together?
I think they are. I mean, I think that we've already seen that nonprofits played a role in bringing the leadership of the DMV together to get us in a position to refund Metro, which I think was really a condition precedent to Amazon coming to the DMV. So, nonprofits played a role in that. The nonprofits have created something called Connective DMV that I think has great promise. A big leader behind that is Stu Solomon, who's a big leader in Accenture, great company, right? And Bob Buchanan, who set up 2021 or 2020, 2020, which was a great organization. So, I mean, nonprofits definitely can play a big role, and they have to.
Greater Washington Partnership is playing a role in that.
Greater Washington Partnership, yep.
No, agreed. And these are all nonprofits, so speaks to the issue for sure. So one of the things you talked about, putting money to work. Well, here, our job as a firm, from War Group many times, is to advise charitable organizations on how to raise money and put it to work. So obviously one of the really hot topics right now in terms of raising funds are for those organizations that are having immediate, impact with COVID, with our medical professionals or, dealing with folks who are directly impacted by COVID, but also on racial inequity issues. There's a huge push towards funding, nonprofits and programs that are having instantaneous, or not instantaneous, but, highly impactful impact on those communities. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing a lot of energy and money flowing into these two issues in particular right now?
I haven't yet seen, well, I've seen announcements of commitments from some of the banks.
A lot of companies, yeah, exactly.
The business roundtable nationally, I've heard a lot of commitments. It's going to take time for that to, work its way into the system, but no question, yes, I've seen some major commitments, not just talked about, but being made, yeah. But again, this is, they have to have traction and get the granularity to have an impact that we're talking about.
Yep. Well, I see a lot of that happening, and those who have launched COVID funds, special funds during this period have done really well, particularly hospitals and medical service groups. And then those who are naturally in the business of impacting racial injustice, have attracted a lot of funding. And I think it's incumbent upon those organizations to make sure that they're highlighting, the good work they're doing, and talk about the metrics of impact they're having. And I'm confident there is money out there right now, in particular for those areas. Hopefully not at, costing the other great programming, support sometimes, but that seems to be the way it's going today. I want to talk, because you're a government man, a former government man, Tony. So this PPP idea and now program that worked for so many nonprofits, how would you judge the impact of that? Have you seen it yourself, for FCC? Have you seen it for the nonprofits that you work with? What's your view on that one?
Yeah, I think this is part of this effort to try to artificially prop up demand, try to minimize the damage from what we're going from the disruption in the economy. And I think it's a good thing. And we ourselves have benefited from it. And I know many, many other nonprofits who have benefited from it. And I think we need to continue it. I don't think, or else we're into a whole new world of hurt. No question about it. Yes.
Are you concerned now that, the significant impact of PPP has sort of taken place, even though they've extended the time frame? But do you worry about this fall, not reemerging fully economically, and nonprofits being hurt as a result?
Well, we're facing two scenarios. One scenario is that we get the vaccine. I try to remain not too political, but I have to say my confidence level is shaky with the current administration. I just have to say that. I mean, I would love to say otherwise, but yeah. But let's say scenario one, despite all this, we get the vaccination, it's widely accepted, it's distributed, we can get through this. That's one scenario. Another scenario I worry about is obviously we have trouble getting the vaccine, period, because of what you've heard. This thing is mutating, the resistance to it is not as long as we thought, yada, yada, yada. Then we're in a whole new world. I talked about, how this is affecting cities. It's certainly going to be affecting nonprofits too. I still believe we're in scenario one. And I think one of the things that I would like to see, I'm a big believer in this, I'd like to see with a new program they're coming through with a new relief, is to ensure that we're supporting workers, but we're also providing an incentive for people to get back to work. We need to do both. We need to always encourage work and support people who are working hard.
Yeah, having a disincentive of earning more by not going to work is not so good. So
right.
I hope in the next program, whatever it is that's launched, in the fiscal stimulus, that they will address that issue.
Right, because if you do that wrong, that could definitely be inflationary. And then if we got inflation again, then we got a whole new problem, right? But right, so
So here's a question probably from our younger audience member. Is there anything that you would have done differently in your early career in terms of your academic track? And do you have any advice? Yeah, aside from everything, do you, I was saying that more for me than you, Tony. Do you have any advice for a young professional looking to enter and grow in the public service sphere?
well, you know, I wouldn't take, like I always tell my students, I was a proctor and I've taught, and I always tell my students, look, I mean, I took the scenic route. I would definitely not take the scenic route. I would take, you know, it's one thing to stop at some rest stops, stop at some national parks. It's another thing to go on the county roads all the way across the country, which is what I did. And I realized, I don't know, I was like in, you know, Illinois, and I realized, oh my God, I need to be on the interstate. And then I had to catch up with everybody. So I would not recommend that to other people. The other thing I always tell my students is to working in local government is a great way to get real experience in public service. If whatever your field, if you work for a good finance director or a good planning director or a good human service director, good mayor, county executive, who wants good people, all the things we're talking about, has a good vision, has a good dashboard, good way of monitoring real outcomes for people, you can learn a world of experience that you can then parlay into a broader career and career advancement. Everybody wants to start at the federal government. You can certainly do that. But I think I would also consider starting at local government and then working your way up that way. And the last thing I always tell people is, you know, one of the reasons I got to DC and was introduced to President Clinton's people is because I had a professor who thought highly of me, Stan Greenberg at Yale, who became President Clinton's pollster. So I always tell people that it's very important to find people who are smart and influential who like you, but don't feel obligated in your career to associate with people who are smart and influential and don't like you and say, well, you know, Tony doesn't like me, but he's very influential and I gotta get him to like, no, if he doesn't, just stay away from that person. Find people who are influential and smart, who want to mentor you, which is where, you know, these apprenticeships I talked about are so important. I'm a big believer in that mentorship. I wouldn't be where I am without the right mentors in my career.
I just couldn't agree with you more strongly. That first group that I got involved with, you know, coming down here from New York was a mentoring group. And that was back in the day, 30 years ago, when we didn't really know what the word mentoring meant so much. But now it is a major, you know, thrust for the nonprofit community. And it's so impactful, which is why we have a big intern program that obviously gives kids a start, you know, in the workplace. And they don't really have to do too much at work, but they need to learn about what it's all about.
Absolutely, absolutely. My career in the Air Force was advanced. I got my appointment to the Air Force Academy partly because when I came into the Air Force, I got a plum assignment as a aide to a wing commander, and I worked in the command post at this fighter wing. And when I went for my appointment, they were saying, well, I had some kind of heart condition, which it turns out was bogus, but they were saying this. And this fighter pilot, Major Gardner, who was a squadron commander, took me under his wing and interceded for me. It's another example of mentorship, you know?
I've got a lot of examples myself. I totally agree with you, and probably most people do. So it's important.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're running out of time. There's a question here. I'll consider the last one, and I don't really understand it. I hope you do. This person enjoys studying the history of cities. From that perspective, it seems that a constant feature of cities is a wide socioeconomic band. Do you think that it is a reasonable target to narrow that gap significantly, or is the wide gap simply an historical proven byproduct of the diversity that a city offers?
Well, you know, the kind of Burkean conservative view of it is it's always been and always will be, all the way back through all these ancient cities I mentioned to now. There have been great divisions in wealth great inequality. I mean, back in ancient, Egypt and Rome and Greece, there were slaves. I mean, yeah, I talk about inequality. So this has persisted into time, but it's something cities have always battled because from ancient times to now, if you're running a city, you basically have, and you would appreciate this as a finance guy, you really are always balancing your two stewardship roles. And they're always in conflict and in tension. One is you're managing your city as a corporate entity, and your own finances you have to keep intact, but you can't just happy-dory, okay, my finances are intact, when you're facing these dramatic human needs right there in your city. So you have a larger stewardship of your community. And they come into tension, they come into conflict. And, it's always been, I bet you it's always going to be, and that's where nonprofits come in to help bridge that divide, that gap.
Well said.
Okay.
So, Mayor Anthony Williams, thank you so much. I have so much respect for you. I came to this city and saw you at work. The city was a mess. You picked it up and put it back on its feet, and it's been in great shape economically since then. A lot of other problems, like you've talked about.
Yeah.
But nonprofit community, critical space. Thank you, FCC, for partially focusing on the nonprofit community's concerns and issues. And thank you for your comments today.
Thank you. Okay.
Appreciate it very much.
All right. Take care, Steve. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye. Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right.